Welcome to the Long Game Podcast. I'm your host, Sandras. As an artist, I have learned that your most powerful art is made from your own story. And as a business owner, I find the same thing to be true with content and social media. The most impactful, powerful, connecting posts or videos are ones that reveal about who you are or what your philosophy is or, about your story. When I moved to my home 6 years ago and got rid of the storage units, I had this idea to share my story through photographing the things that I've kept stored all these years, right? Like, what's important to you? What have I kept in storage all these years through all the moves and all that? That will surely tell my story through the different phases of my life. So I thought, and that idea has always been in the back of my mind. And I've put off cleaning out the basement. Number one, because life, right? Who wants to do that? But number two, because these things are going to be part of my project. I can't get rid of them yet. So today's guest is actually taking that whole premise and bringing it to life. Martie McNabb is a personal historian and photo organizer. Yes, she goes and organizes photos and makes albums and helps you keep your family memories and gets them to a place that they can be shared. She has created a 30-day challenge that has really inspired me in so many ways. The big question she is asking is, if someone asked you to list the 30 things you keep that would tell your life story, what would you choose? And the best thing about this challenge is that there's no deadline, although you can totally start now. But it doesn't have to be this big undertaking of all the stories in your life. It's about noticing what we keep and that each object tells a story, from shells and rocks to letters and even t-shirts. It's about the things that bring us joy, that bring magic to our lives and meaning. So we talk a lot about story and connection here. And this is a genius yet simple way to start bringing your story out. So I'm excited to share this challenge and Martie's story with you on the podcast today. Our conversation is fun and thoughtful, just the way that your history might be. The long game is your story in 30 things. You're listening to the Long Game Podcast with Sandra. In a world where everyone is doing, it's easy to get lost in a sea of comparison, secret tricks, and promises of overnight success. The long game is my approach to business, the actual day in and day out philosophy that you have to show up, you have to do the work, and there's no quick fixes for long-term success. I'm a web designer, digital strategist, and energetic thinker, and I'm here to share the process and lessons I experience with my clients daily who are going through the same struggles of building a business as you are. We'll hear from successful entrepreneurs sharing their long game strategies, and I'm fun, so we're going to have a little fun along the way too. Thanks for being here. Let's get to today's episode. So welcome, Martie. I am so excited to have you here because I love the work that you do, and we go way back. I actually met you through the work that you do back in the day in Brooklyn. We are both long-term Brooklynites, which I love that our friendship started there, but it has continued, right, through the years. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell everybody what you do. Tell us about the events that you host. Give us a little background.
Sure. So as you mentioned, Sandra, I think we connected the first time when you came to the branded saloon where show and tell. Yeah, where show and I think even back then it was still called show and tell.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and because we were inviting people to bring anything, and you brought your daughter's dress, and I was just like, oh my God, it's so beautiful. And very different story than my friend Bill in his book, What We Keep, but it's still about the preciousness of childhood and motherhood and daughterhood and all of that.
So that dress was actually my dress from
Oh,
when I was a baby.
oh,
And there's a
that's right.
photo, like when my parents, I'll just back up for everybody. My parents took us to the Sears portrait studio, and there is a
Oh,
photo of me at 15 months old, 12 months old, whatever it is, in the dress. And I'm crying. I hated it, whatever. And so my mother saved that dress. So I brought the dress when my daughter was around that same age. We did a family photo shoot, and I brought the dress to the photo shoot. And I was like, you have to take some photos. And it was like, we were just getting her in that dress. It was like, if I'd waited a month, it wouldn't have worked. So the story was, here's a photo of me, 40 years ago in the dress. And now my daughter
that's
is in the dress.
that's right. And I have not seen those photos yet. So I hope to see
Oh,
them.
I will post them on the show notes for everybody. How about
I would love that. I would
that?
love that. Absolutely. So basically I started my first company almost 20 years ago. It's called Memories Out of the Box.
Hmm.
And I've had to, as everybody talks about, pivot in that business since I moved out of New York City. But the idea was people take a lot of photos, collect a lot of stuff, and or inherit
Hmm.
vast quantities of photos, documents, and memorabilia that contains people's life stories, family life stories. And so I started Memories Out of the Box with the goal of helping individuals and families tell their visual narrative from all that stuff. So instead of it sitting in a box, I go through it. I do a lot of organizing and curating, and then choosing which things tell somebody's personal history. And so I started that
Wow.
20 years ago. And as I think you knew, Sandra, I
I
had
remember you had the store.
the
You had a brick and
store.
mortar,
All
right?
right. I had a brick and, because what did I know about it?
Right. Why not open a shop? Right.
I mean, WordPress wasn't around like back then. Do your own websites. We didn't have business coaches. There really weren't co-working spaces or
Mhm.
co-creation spaces. So if at that time, if there were, I would have probably done something different. But anyway, I came
It's your
into
path. It's your
it.
path.
I came into a little bit of money, and I was just like, I'd always wanted to help people with this. So like a do it yourself part of it, a do it with
Hmm.
you part of it, like kind of coaching around your photos and your things and how to tell a story. And then the do it for you part. I
Hmm.
always wanted that. And that's why I wanted that space so I could have workshops and
Right.
classes and space for people to come in and work on their visual narratives.
And I
But
remember it had beautiful albums, like the really rich paper and that kind of stuff, like beautiful, sentimental keepsake albums.
yeah, I know. Beautiful scrapbooks, beautiful like silk covers, leather
Hmm.
covers, just a beautiful collection. I was so grateful to connect with all these people. But what I found is people won't like make decisions about like, so they buy these things, they buy all the frames, the
I'm
digital
raising my hand.
frames.
I've got a box of empty albums. Even.
Well, I know because I would get the boxes with all the photos and things and the empty album
The
in it.
album.
So I was like, oh, okay. And, it's a myth. The idea either you have the time or the money. The
Hmm.
reality is if you don't have the time, you don't have the time or the money. And if you have the money, it's like you're not going to be spending your time doing this kind of work. I mean, it's because you're making money. Like, it's just so I found people love the idea of my classes and workshops.
Hmm. But the commitment, right? Making the personal commitment to it.
So I had all this space and nobody really using it. And I realized I wasn't solving anybody's problem by giving them more photo albums and scrapbooks and frames and digital frames. Oh, that was going to solve everybody's problem.
Oh, the digital frame, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm literally, my computer is on a digital photo frame box right now. I wish everybody could see it. It's the truth.
So, and I'm as guilty as everybody else.
Yeah.
Sandras, I am, so it's like the shoemaker's children, so it's just like, so I realized I'm not solving anybody's problems with that. So it was only the do it for you service, literally, where people were just handing me off their boxes and bags, suitcases, giving me keys
Wow.
to storage units, keys to their second home. Like, you go
Wow.
and you make sense of it. You do, so which is a wonderful honor and, really just incredibly intimate and honor to be able to be welcomed in and to just be like, please help me like create something beautiful and meaningful from all this stuff,
So
so.
many stories you must know, right?
And I have one client that I'm still working with 20 years later. She was my
Mm.
first client. And so I've seen her kids grow up and get married and have their kids. And yeah, that's the, beautiful goal, is being able to do that. But as you know, Sandra, all too well, the biggest challenge to something as unique as what I was offering back then, there was nobody like me. At least I
Right.
couldn't find them. Now there is, thanks to the photo managers, the community that I'm a member of now. But back then there really wasn't. So it's like, how do you get the word out about what I do? And so I was like, okay, so it's word of mouth. People need to get to know me. They need to connect with me on a deep level. They need to trust me, all of that. Like, it's word of mouth, but I need more mouths.
Right, right, totally.
So that's when I went to a friend's storytelling event called Tell It Brooklyn. But I was sitting there, not that I was going to be, because I don't see myself as a storyteller, not the performance part, like that scares the heck out of me, but
Right.
it's different. And so, but I went to be supportive because that's just my MO. And she had all these rules, you get 10 minutes, you can't read from a script, you can't have a prop. And I was like, what? I'm
That's
like,
very confirming.
I'm like, well, first of all, like, I'm like thinking about the Civil War diaries, the, marriage certificates and newspaper clippings, you name all the photos, of course, baby, hair, baby
Hmm.
teeth, the bracelet from the hot. I'm thinking about all these wonderful things and thinking, well, why can't you bring me? Like, why couldn't
Those are the inspiration, right?
right? They're the inspiration for the story, at least for me. I know that.
Hmm.
And so I was just like, from that, I thought, okay, I need more mouths. I need to be out there. People need to get to know me, all of that. And I thought, why don't I start these story sharing? I call it story sharing events called Show and Tales, as a way to market myself. And I'm almost, next spring will be a decade, 10
Wow.
years of hosting these events.
And what I love is that you have taken them from, hey, show up and bring something, to thematically designed. So now, 10 years later, to give everybody a kind of a fast forward, it is an orchestrated, like, there is a business model you've created out of this.
Yes, yes. I mean, well, slowly.
Right, right. Well, yes.
It is the long
This is
game
the
after
long
all.
game. Totally. You're my people. You're my people.
I am I'm an ideas person, and I think a lot of your listeners might understand, like anybody who's multi-passionate, like has so many things going on, ideas, that it's taken me a while to like shift to the, oh yes, this is a business, and it's a business, it's a business that can not only benefit me, but benefit the people in my community. And it's not the business that benefited, but what I didn't expect to happen was the transformation that happens for people who come to my events and share their
Mm.
stories, and the community and connection that
Hmm.
happens at those. Every single one, people, I mean, literally 150 of them, well, 120 of them in person. And
Hmm.
every single one, people stayed afterwards and continued a conversation.
Yep.
As opposed to,
Definitely.
I've gone to the Moth, I've gone to these other ones, which I
Right.
love. I absolutely adore them. I have friends who are
Yep.
Grand Slam winners, but
Wow.
yeah, but it's a performance.
Right. And that is also a curated or choreographed type of piece. You know, when you go to the Moth, you work on your story with someone beforehand to perfect it, to have these places of inflection. Like yours is a, for lack of a better term, a common man place. Like you can come in and just be like, I don't have to be a performer. I just have this dress I want to share, this military medal that there's a really interesting story, backstory to. Could you tell us some of the themes that you've created for
Oh,
your show and tales? Like,
yeah. Yes. Well, and Sandra, what happened was I actually took inspiration from my friends who kept on saying having it be abroad, bring anything was too
mhm,
intimidating for a lot of people, that they wanted more direction. And so that's what started me down the path of creating these themes. So I now have 24 themes, and thankfully,
awesome.
I have an amazing graphic artist and illustrator who's illustrated all 24 of these. Well, 22. I have another graphic designer who did the other two, but yeah. And so it really does focus people can know what to bring as opposed to saying, bring anything,
Right,
So
right.
yeah. And people are like, what's your favorite? I'm like, I have no idea.
They're all my favorite. Right, right, right.
But I do think cards, letters, and thank you notes is my favorite because my mother is a card saver and a card giver and, all of that. So I think she inspired that. And that's the juicy ones. And they also travel
Mhm.
quite easily in my little RV. So
And store well over the years as
they
well,
do.
right?
And they take up a little space.
Right. Well, some of the others are the family jewels, shoes, boots, bags, and hats, artist inspiration tools. I love you've also gone, you've done like the letters and things. And then there's also HIV and AIDS, which I love that being like very pointed, because that was such you know, a wave that happened and it affected so many people's lives. And artifacts and totems. I mean, there's all these different themes that you have. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And it was considered, a lot of people soon after 9/11
mm,
were encouraging me to do, and I just couldn't at that, like, it seemed way too soon.
right, right.
So, but I did my first past and present. That's a theme I do through the book that I was featured in with Allison Gilbert and her book called Past and Present. And she, and so just 2 years ago was my first 9/11 show and tell.
Oh, wow.
So, and I'm going to be doing one this 9/11 as well. And I just felt like with HIV and AIDS, like I felt like there needed to be some chunk of time in between, like before I added these things. It just, yeah, it was too
Hmm.
hard. But yeah,
Definitely. And I love that piece that it is, that those are stories that are so thematic and all together. And they can translate like into a letters and cards, maybe, but really to give it
absolutely.
its own place, that's really special. So I love that. And you just touched on, I was going to ask you, where in the United States are you right now? Because you have done an amazing thing with your life as well and got
Yeah.
rid of all the stuff, put it in storage, and you RV now around the country.
Yeah. Yeah. So I used to live in Brooklyn.
Yep.
And I had a 625 square foot apartment there. I think it's 5 years ago, as of this month, I sold it.
Wow.
Got rid of as much of the stuff I didn't want to take with me. Thank God I have a basement at my mom's up in Vermont.
Right. The storage, quote unquote.
The storage.
Quotes, right?
Exactly. The storage is in her basement, and she's getting a little irritated by it because it was supposed to be a short-term storage. But life, right. As you know, as a parent, it's gonna how you've got younger kids, but it's ultimately going to be happening. And
so, are you telling me it never ends right now?
It doesn't end. if you have a good relationship, it never ends.
Right, totally.
So yes, so I put the stuff I was going to keep in my mom's basement, and I bought a little RV, and her name is actually Brooklyn.
Love it.
And so I got her 4 years ago, and live part-time on the road. But it's still in that 625 square foot apartment, and now in my little 21-foot Travato, Winnebago Travato. It's still amazing how much stuff.
Right. Well, I love too, like,
oh my God.
This just fits, this life move fits so well with show and tells because, it enables you to move from city to city and, be able to host things. And even though we had the pandemic the past 2 years, like you're still able to cultivate community around this. So it's great that it works out that way for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was part of the Association of Personal Historians, or APH, for 10 years before it folded. And about 2 years before it folded, I think it folded about 4 years ago. Now there's memoir writers, oral historians, video biographers, and other people that I call legacy artists like myself. So in that group, and they're still doing all their work. Like they're still out there doing all their work, wonderful work. But I gave the idea of it was originally show and tell, like you knew it when, and I gave that idea to them as a way to market their business. And they loved the idea and hosted events around the world. And so it's been quite a whirlwind. But that ended up when a bunch of them started reaching out to me about, well, how do you do this? How do you get people to talk? How do you get people not to talk? How do you and I'm like, I'm in New York City. I don't have any problem getting people to talk.
Seriously. I need the cane to pull them. What is that?
I'm just sort of like, okay, you got 3 minutes.
Time is up,
So it's just like, all these. So everybody was coming to me asking, how do you do this? How do you do that? How do you whatever? And that's when I ended up coming up with the idea of starting a membership community where I teach people how to host these events as ways to market their businesses. So,
it's so cool because, we've talked about this in a realm of personal history, but that also goes into, that's your story. And, that goes into your business narrative, all of that. I mean, we've talked a lot on this podcast about how story infuses into your business. So all of it comes together. It isn't just to say, here's the story of my grandmother coming over from overseas or something. You can, and we'll parlay into how that works for now, but it is about who you are and bringing that forward.
Well, and to me, it's especially with who I think a lot of your listeners are. We do personal work, and people want to get to know us and get to understand us and connect with us in some way. And so, if there's like, I have a similar story. I didn't look at people give you different perspectives. That's the beauty. I've hosted 150 of these events. And, as we all know, perspective can be very different from one person to another, how you were raised, what was important, all of the influences. So looking at an object and hearing the story that somebody else is telling about it, it's like it really opens up a world to the difference in perspective. And that it's just so
cool.
connective, and so like, that's why, this is, so I love doing what I'm doing.
And I want to ask you too, because, I know you personally and I follow you on social media. So one thing that I want to commend you about is always doing lives, no matter where you are. We talk about the power of video and being visible here and how that really helps. And I know a lot of my listeners have that, like, oh, I got to get over that. And you had to as well. And you don't take excuses. I mean, you're never in the same place. The lighting is whatever. Sometimes you're just in the van doing it because it's where you are, but you don't let that stop you. And you put yourself out there, you get your message out there to people. So tell us a little bit about using live video.
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, is there anything more challenging than starting your own business?
I mean,
Is
really.
there? And showing up every day for your, your family, your friends, yourself, all of that. Like, there's
Well, it's
nothing more.
easier to show up for people you don't know than it is for your family and your friends when you start revealing yourself and what you do. Like, it's actually harder to start that
Yeah.
piece, being judged in your mind, all of that.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Like, they can be support, but they can also be like, I'm scared because they're my people. Whereas,
There's some
people reveal
freedom.
themselves in the grocery line, you're like, oh my gosh, we just parted and now it's to never be mentioned again.
There is a kind of yes, I've had people share things at my events that they've never shared with anybody else before. So you're right. There is sort of a way of being, incognito,
Vulnerable. Yeah.
that you being vulnerable to people you don't know. So
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely that. But I forgot you asked
I was
about
talking about lives.
lives. Yes. Well, I ended up just realizing that I love what I do so much. I have seen the power of these events, the transformative power of my events, the connective power of my events. I didn't think I was starting this. I didn't know what it was going to be,
Right.
but it just kind of like has just continued. And it slowly, that's made me go, okay, well, I have to keep on showing up more
Mhm.
and more. Like, that means I have to open up, that I need to share more of my life and more of my struggles and more of the, all of that, that it's like I work in personal history and photo organization, photo management. That's my field. So this is about telling, helping people tell their personal history, their family story, their personal, whether it's in business or whether it's just
Mhm.
for their families,
Right.
so it's like I certainly have to be a quote unquote a role model, but it's not been like it doesn't come to, I would never a million years ago, like, never think of myself as a storyteller. I came from a family that didn't like, that wasn't a thing we did. Like, it
Right.
wasn't
Right.
like, I never heard, like, if I asked my mother, like, those prompts from the personal history world, they have like these little booklets that have
Right.
prompts asking questions. My mother would give me like a 5-word answer. Like, it's
Right.
like, so, but if I end up taking a picture or I take a thing and I ask her the story, it's like she just gets that 5-word thing and then she's off running, sharing everything. So it's been a process, but I've come to realize that it's a brave thing to put yourself out there,
Mhm.
but I love what I do. I love what I encourage people to do. I love the community and connections that it can build. And I've seen it, I've witnessed it. And so that's more powerful. That vision and everything is more powerful than me being afraid of what my hair is looking like, or,
Right.
do I
Right.
have something stuck in my tooth, or
Or just even like, yeah, the
am I
blinking record, like we get a little frozen with that.
yeah,
That's awesome.
exactly. Am
And I love that. I love that, you've taken that step to kind of, you need that to keep going. So you do.
Absolutely. And as you know, my big push now is to grow my community, my membership community.
Mm-hmm.
I've listened to, as you know, Sandra, I've traveled across the country now 4 or 5 times. And I am
Awesome.
so grateful to have you come along on the ride with me.
I mean, that means so much. I love that. And I think about you. I'm like, oh, okay. So it's actually an amazing turn of events to have you on here because you are such a dedicated listener. So tell us,
I
I
love
want
it.
to talk about what's next for you, what you're doing now, what's now. So I know that you are running a 30-day challenge, and this is, really something that everybody can take part in, called Your Life in 30 Things. So tell
Yes.
us
Yes.
about what's happening.
Yes, yes. So please, and I started it September 1st, which is Save Your Photos Month, which is run
Mm-hmm.
through the photo managers that I'm a member of. I've worked with a small group who've been meeting since the spring, since our conference, when my friend Bill Shapiro ended up joining us and talking about his book that he wrote with his partner, Naomi Wax, which is What We Keep. It's all about what we keep and the
Love it.
stories that
And we'll
they
link to
tell,
that in the show notes as well.
right?
It's super cool.
Yeah. And so, needless to say, Bill and I are kindred spirits because I found out about his book when a friend was like, he's doing this book about the stories of the things we keep. Like, he's doing
How do
show
you
and
not know
tell.
each other?
I know,
Right.
show and tell, in a book form. And I'm like, oh, great. Because my personal historian writer friends were like, you've got to write a book. And I'm like,
Totally.
what part of
There's room for everybody.
everybody? I'm like, what part of I'm a visual narrator that you're not getting? But anyway, I'm like grateful to Bill. So we ended up, I just thought, oh, well, it's not about the photos. It's not only about the photos, let's say. Photos are important. They're, like a foundation for telling stories without a doubt. I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
over your shoulder right now, looking at some photos.
Yeah.
So they're foundational for sure for stories. But I was just like, but it's the stories we want to save.
Mm-hmm.
It's the stories that the photos tell. So we just started riffing on this, like, so it should be Save Your Stories Month. Or, so anyway, we just started thinking, how can we, motivate people to start thinking about and saving and sharing their stories.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the start of it for sure, but saving them in some way. So we, I was like, this is a crazy idea, but what do you think about starting this September 1st? But you can start it any time.
Totally. Totally. And it's something that once you get into the idea of it, as you'll explain coming up, you can just do it ongoing. There doesn't have to be a time frame, but the challenge idea kind of ramps it up.
Exactly. And, I think the biggest thing that I felt with show and tales was that a lot of people felt like it had to be these really important stories, really important objects,
Yeah.
heirlooms,
Deep
things like,
memorabilia. Yes. Yeah.
and I'll never forget two young teachers walking into show and tell at Brandon Saloon. And they thought there was something else going on in the back room, like some, like trivia or something.
Right.
And they walk in like, and I'm like, hey, you here for the show and tell? And they're like, what's a show and tell? So they joined us. And the one woman basically was like, I don't think I have anything. And she looks into her purse. She had her sunglasses that had been broken into. And she told the story about how she's a ESL teacher and her young elementary school. One of the students was so frustrated not being able to communicate that when she, leaned down and tried to talk to him, he got so upset because he hadn't been able to communicate that he just pushed her in the face and broke her sunglasses. And I just thought, wow, like,
Right.
those kind of connective things, and that she, like, it was an important point for both him and her,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like literally, like, I've had people bring in empty egg cartons. I've had people, like, you name it, like, the hat or their shoes or something because they haven't been prepared for it. They just walk in and I'm like, it doesn't have to be this major story. It's like, look around. What are the 30 objects that could tell your story, your life story?
That's awesome. And so that's what the challenge is.
That's
If
it.
we'll have a link in the show notes for everyone listening. You can go to Martie's website and download a PDF that has inspiration. Along the sides are her beautifully drafted, right? Beautifully illustrated themes. So if you need something to help you along the way, but the idea is really to pull what's that rock on your desk? What's the photo sitting there? Like, what are the objects? I mean, I look around my desk as we're recording this, and I've got essential oil. I've got a stone from Maine. I've got a family photo. I've got a photo from college, the house we lived in. Like, those are my stories that I could tell. And, what I love about this too is that it's revealing of ourselves, but it can also be used in a number of different ways so that you could have these stories around the fire pit in the backyard with your family, based on these objects. You could use these as a prompt for social media as a business owner when you have your get to know me Thursday prompt, or post. And I've often thought about that, like this is a way to get personal. You mentioned that earlier, like how do
Yeah.
people know us? And it was funny because when we were talking about this and when it first came out in the beginning, this month, I downloaded it and I thought, oh, I had been recently going through some boxes in my basement and I found a legal document from like leaving a job. We were intertwined so well and I had to have like a legal departure. And that was 25 years ago. And it really made me realize like the reason it took me back, like, wow, here's this document, why I left. And when I went into my head about the story why I left, I was like, those are my core values because I'm experiencing the same thing 25 years later. Like, and I actually we'll go back, I'll link to it, an episode on core values. Like your core values don't change, right?
Right.
Like to me, I was like, wow, I'm in this space 25 years later and here I am finding this. And I left that position because of the way I felt that I still feel now. And so I was like, that's a core value, right? So it can bring you back in so many different ways, or there's these threads through your life. So many different stories you could come to the surface with.
Right. Yes. A friend of mine who is joined the challenge, who's also a photo manager, she connected me to the book and reminded me because I'd read it years ago, The Power of Moments. And it is about, like, for me, so much of the things that I have around me are about that remind me of relationships because relationships are my core value. Yeah. But there's like connection, like awards, like appearance, there's all different, these core values that we have. So that was a great thing to talk about. Like, I just realized if I had to lump all the 30 things that I wrote down, I would say at least 75 or 80% of them were about relationships because relationships are so important to me.
And
I was
so
just
interesting, right? Because when it does evoke what your core values are because it is what you keep. You have made an effort to keep this stuff over time. I mean, sometimes I think about it, I'm like, what was in it? Like when we moved out of the city, we had a storage unit and like, sometimes I'd be like, there's an empty box with like 2 things in it. I was like, I paid for this shit. I paid to store this. Like, are you kidding me? So sometimes like, I was like, what am I holding on to? What does it say? Right. And but like a lot of the stuff is old photographs or, I've got my grandmother's china and, I'm never using that, but I can't let that go. I can't just send it to the Goodwill. Like it's in its container and I have it. And gosh, I hope China comes back in and my kids want it because they're going to have a box if not. But like those are, we make such a concerted effort to keep these things that, it does say what's important to us.
Yeah. Or, transitions, like what was a major transition, what was a turning point, what was, who's important, what's important, like you said, what's important to you in your work. Like you have this document. And that was sort of like all the work that I did with Memories Out of the Box. I remember, quite a few times coming across like photos from a wedding and the person wasn't, they were divorced and on to their next, right? And they were always like, what do I do with these things? And I'm like, you're not going to make a wedding album out of it, but I think it's still, right? But I'm like, but it's still an important part of your life. So I encourage you to make one spread of it or make, something like, or a book that just has these like critical, because you're not the person that you are today in your relationship. If it hadn't been for that, either a choice of like, I don't want that. That's not for me. It's not my core value. And I'm on to this other thing. So I'm not a believer in getting rid of things that, quote unquote, don't serve us. Like some people might have said, why did you keep that legal document? Right. But see, I think you wouldn't want to have a folder full of it or, a banker's box full of all this stuff. But having that document keeps that in mind. I think it's critical to.
And it's not an everyday thing, it's in a box in the basement, somewhere in it. And it could have very well been shred with all the other stuff that I paid my children to shred. I went through things, but I kept that also because I was like, all right, there's a legality that's attached to it. That's an ongoing thing. So I'm keeping that. But, that type of thing brought me back.
Yeah.
I love just, we're always trying to think of how do I tell my story, And so this is it's such a great step, a stepping stone to how to do that. You've created such a beautiful piece that's so simple, yet, like I said, you could do a Facebook Live on this. Pick, every week you could do one thing and you've got 30 weeks of content that you've created. You can share those stories with your family. You can, and it can be different things. I mean, maybe not everything is for the public's ears, but
exactly.
You can start, it's a starting point and a piece of that. And I really love that because we are talking about connection always, right?
Yeah. And I just love, like, even before the contest started, the challenge started, one of my colleagues who's doing this 30-day challenge with me, who's up in Toronto, she was just sitting at the pool. She was writing certain things out. Somebody she'd known for a couple of years in the same condo association was like, what are you working on? And she explained what it was. And the woman was just like, that's what you do? Oh, you help with all the photos, so it's like potential job. But the best part was, because even if it's not the job, like the impact is what is interesting, because what happened is the next day, the woman said she and her daughter went into the spare room where there was a lot of this stuff that needed to go through. And so Faith Van Wart ended up encouraging, like just in that talking, for this mother and daughter to have that time to go in and talk about the things that mattered to them and things like that. So it's just like, I love all the spin-offs. So it doesn't have to be, right? It doesn't have to be like, you don't have to write out all 30. You don't have to get social on social media. It can be just for yourself. I've learned a lot about myself. I mean, I came up with the idea and then all of a sudden I'm like, Martie, you've got to sit down and write out your 30 things.
and you did, right?
And I did.
Did you brainstorm them all at once, or did you tell me a little bit about your process of going through it?
Well, it was interesting. Well, like I said, I think it's really important, like we talked about earlier, to not overthink this, to really, really not overthink it. And so I just, sat down with my notebook, because it was before I actually had my VA. Thank you, Nicole.
Right. We'll talk about that. I want it, right?
To make this, I just started, and it was really interesting because Faith said the same thing, that when she finally sat down and started writing them, they just kind of flowed. It just kind of, she said, bing, bing, bing. It didn't go quite bing, bing, bing for me, but it just kind of flowed. I was just like, I started looking around my space. I started, looking around my RV, which, I have a small space. there, but but there's still a lot of stuff in it, So and it just really started flowing. I think the first 10, it just came like that. And then I set it aside, and then I came back and I just, started writing a few more down, and it just like flowed pretty simply.
That's awesome. So, and I also want to say you've created a hashtag that goes along with this, so
Yes.
that anybody who participates can stay connected and see what other people are doing. So if you are posting on social media, this again is called 30-day challenge, and the hashtag is your life in 30 things. And it's just, I think, a cool way to connect. You can see what other people are doing. And again, we're going to link to this sheet as well. And there's a video where you explain it on your website. So I really encourage everybody to go and do this. It's a way to just bring your stories out and find other meaning in what you're doing or the items that you kept. And it also makes me think, as we come off of the summer, what have you collected? Like I said, the rocket from Maine that I brought back. It's I brought back this piece of driftwood I found. I'm like, oh, the driftwood, it's so cool. It's not valuable. It's not, you know what I mean? It's just this piece of wood that reminds me of sitting on the deck every morning, having my tea and looking out over the water and the trees kind of thing. So
exactly. And that's what Bill and Naomi said. They interviewed hundreds of people to get, to whittle it down to the 150 people and the stories. And they said not one person chose their item based on monetary value. Not one. So it's about relationships, connections, memories, a transition, of standing up for yourself. I'm not going to do that. All of that kind of thing. It's really beautiful. So I highly recommend you checking out what we keep. And
I will link to that. I've checked it out. I will link to that. And tell us, where can we find you? Where can everyone find this, even though we'll link to it? And where is the best place to connect with you if they want to work with you on some photo management and personal history?
Yes. So my tag is Show and Tales, and that's TALES. And you can reach out to me at Martie, MARTIE, at memoriesoutofthebox.com. And you can look, I'm not very fond of my website. That might be something we'll work on at some point.
We've talked, right, exactly.
But the Memories Out of the Box, you can see some before and after pictures. And yes, I'm happy to talk to you about helping you tell your visual narrative as well.
Awesome. And we're going to link to everything. We will link to the showandtales.com, the 30-day challenge. And I'm already collecting. So as I create my content plan going forward, I'm going to implement this into it. Even like I said, if it's a 1 day a week and I can do something personal in it. So I want to thank you so much for being here. It was a joy, and for us to just reconnect again in person, and for you to share all that you're working on.
Well, and I do have to say, Sandra, it's been the long game. I've talked about it with a few people who are talking the 10-year overnight success club. Yes. And I have you have brought me such joy and connection and encouragement, ideas, and all of that through, I feel like you've been traveling cross country with me in Brooklyn, the RV, as we
awesome.
travel. So,
oh my God, girl.
Thank you.
Guys, I'm ready to fly out and meet you somewhere, because
next year I'm going to do a road trip, and I'd love to have you come.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And everyone, go check out showandtales.com. All right, we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me today. You can access more info in the show notes at thelonggamepodcast.net. If today's show connected with you in some way, please share it with your friends or hop on iTunes and leave me a review. Until next time, keep playing the long game.